Yeah.
Which we are
Everyone's
not
having,
discussing today. We are, if you need a break from COVID, we are here for this.
yes, we are here for this. We can talk about other things when it comes to chronic illness and disability,
Although
So,
all of us staying home, there's a lot of people having some fun. So I guess we can tie in that way as well.
yes, people are having to get creative in their homes right now. That's one of the things that has really been coming up in my therapy sessions with my clients is what are you doing to keep yourself busy? What are you doing to keep yourself sexy?
As a sex therapist, what are you doing to keep yourself busy is a whole nother realm.
It really is. You can get very creative with things that are going on right now. That's the whole goal. So
I
that's
can
definitely,
imagine.
yeah, what people are looking for. They're looking for new ways to get creative with their partners. It's so interesting. Like one of the things that I'm finding is that a lot of my folks that have chronic illness and disability that usually have low sexual desire, since this whole thing started and they are in their homes more, they have found like a little bit of peak with sexual desire,
Wow.
you know, which has
That
been
is
so neat.
fascinating.
It has been fascinating. And it's one of the things that's really been coming up in sessions is, the peak of sexual desire, how to get creative with sex, how to get creative with yourself while you're during this time. But, virus or no virus, I mean, these are the things that tend to come up in the world of being a sex therapist that specializes in chronic illness and disability. So,
The thing about chronic illness and disabilities, we're all so primed for this experience. We've been home, most of us, for quite a bit of time anyway. So it's,
yeah.
yeah, I always joke that my sweats are my spanny lingerie. That's, if I'm really like amping it up, it's yoga pants. Like that is a special anniversary night is yoga pants with the off the shoulder sweatshirt instead of the full like introvert hoodie.
Oh, yeah. So you're
Yeah,
spicing it up a little bit by
totally
getting
I
up
have
in.
my Doctor Who sweatshirt, which like has like a little bit of shoulder action. It is definitely hot up here.
That's great. Yeah. So what different things can you wear in your spoonie gear,
I mean, we have so many bandages. There's so many options. You could go like full Fifth Element if anyone's old enough to remember that movie and do the bandages.
Oh, yeah, sure. Great
Bandages
movie.
everywhere.
Yeah.
You can definitely go into bondage with that stuff. It's there's.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You can get creative with bondage gear. Maybe you can put some leather on too.
I wish any of this was in my life, but this is way more entertaining than my life. Uh,
Well, it's one of the things that have really been coming up in my work that
okay.
people that are, that have chronic pain due to their chronic illness or just chronic pain conditions are really using different ways to cope with their pain. And one of the things that's coming up in the research that I'm doing that I'm talking about next Friday in a big workshop at the Integrative Sex Therapy Institute, and of course it's going to be via webcast. We are looking at how people are engaging in like BDSM behavior
Okay.
to cope with good pain versus bad pain.
That is freaking fascinating.
Yes, how people are
Wow.
distracting themselves and focus on being whipped, doing some flogging, of course, light impact, and how people are really gaining a sense of relief, but also a sense of power.
So yeah, I just had to take a little pause there just to put my 12-year-old on the other side of the house.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
this is
no, I mean it's
normal if everyone
interesting.
home.
Yeah, that usually doesn't happen.
No, but as you were saying about the positive effects of BDSM with pain that you plan instead of pain that you have no control over. This
Yes,
is a very
yes,
different kind of thing, is to to actually have something
right.
to plan.
Yeah, yeah. As a kink aware and polyamorous aware friendly therapist, I see a lot of different types of clients. And, I do have my clients that are kinky and they're poly and they also have disability, chronic illness. And those are the things that come up. It's a good way to distract themselves. It's also a way to have some control and power because, with an illness, you don't have that, right? So being
Oh no, do
able,
tell me. I have no idea.
yeah. Oh, you don't know anything
What?
about that, right?
I didn't dislocate
So
my
it's
tibia
just,
yesterday by trying to get down from the chicken coop. Absolutely not. That didn't happen. Yeah. No, it's
yep,
yeah,
yep,
control
yep.
definitely seems like a theme in what you had written in your show notes about. And that's fascinating.
Yes, so control, being able to hold control and how you feel, and being able to switch up your roles in the bedroom. So it's interesting. A lot of my clients that have chronic pain, chronic illness, they will engage and be in the role of a dom,
Wow.
or in BDSM culture, you call it a top. If you're a top, you're more of the dom. If you're a bottom, you're more of the sub. And so being able to take those controls and to be able to do something different to distract yourself, it's like playing a role or something. It's really interesting how it comes up in therapy, and of course consensual and all of that. But it's a nice relief for people. It's a nice way to be able to cope with pain in a different way.
So how do you help people explore this? Like someone who is not familiar with these, or their only familiarity is like some of the books that have come out lately. Like how do you help people?
Well, there's a lot of different online resources. In DC, we have the Black Rose Community Group where they have meetings. There's a local dungeon here in DC where people can go, and they have Dungeon 101, and they teach you everything about it, which I think is fascinating. So I refer a lot of folks to that. I try to refer people to some books though, but if they really want to have the experience, and if they are partnered, they can go with their partner or they can go with a group of friends. It's really important to be involved in a sense of community. I think being in a sense of community really helps folks when it comes to looking at BDSM. And one of the things that I do with them is we talk about the different language in it, because it does have its own language. So for those that don't know, BDSM, the B and the D is bondage and discipline. The D and S is also dominance and submission, and the S and M is sadism, and masochism. So sadism is where you like to inflict some type of psychological, physical response, and the masochism is where you like to receive it. And so there's different code words too, rack, which is risk aware, consensual kink. There's different safe words that people use. You can use the traffic light. Green means to go. Yellow is to slow down, and red is to stop. So there's different things that we can do as sex therapists to help people when they're wanting to engage in some other way in their sex positive to cope with pain. So, this has just recently been coming up in a lot of my sessions. And so I find it to be, serious, definitely quite fascinating with everything that's taking place right now in the world of coping with pain and disability.
So for people who are not, if BDSM is not something that appeals to them, is there another way that they can explore pain, control, and sexuality?
Absolutely. Well, it's all about communication. Sex at its heart is about communication, and it's getting creative. So if you have a partner, it is talking with them about what brings you pleasure. I always tell folks that, lay out your body is like a blueprint. Lay that out and find out the sensations that feel good to you, and communicate that. And if it's your hand, if it's your leg, whatever that is, those are the things that can help bring a lot of pleasure to your body, especially if sex and penetration or something is out of the question, right? Mm-hmm. So there's different ways to get creative if you're someone that does not engage in kink or BDSM. And those are the things that I tend to really recommend to my clients when we're talking about this when it comes to sexuality, because of course, there's so many misconceptions with disability, and sexuality. There's the idea that people that have disability, they are not sexual, right? Or they are told to be asexual. I have so many clients that come into my office who are partnered or they're single, and they're constantly telling me, Dr. Phillips, I was raised in a home where I was treated like a child. And I was told that I could not be in relationships. I could not be sexual. And here I am, and I'm wanting to be sexual.
And how do you help someone take that first step from being infantilized into a consensual sexual relationship?
Well, we talk about what it is that they are sexual about, right? What is sexuality? Yeah. What do you like about sex? What defines your sexuality? How do you express your sexuality? There's a lot of research that talks about that people have sexual rights and people want to be sexual, but what we're seeing on the lack in the research is how do people express themselves and how do they negotiate their needs with their partners who have disability? And so the way that we do that is, first of all, we have to define what does sex mean to them. You know, what does disability mean to them? You know, we're in a culture where, you know, when you think about disability, what comes to your mind? You know, do you immediately think about someone in a wheelchair or another form of physical disability? Or maybe you think about other disabilities that affect the body. What does your disability mean to you? I think for so long, everything was a medical model, right? And doctors and psychologists really defining what disability is. But what does disability mean to the person that has disability?
That's an interesting question that I don't know many people who get asked that, even those of us who do use wheelchairs.
Right.
That's
Like what?
interesting.
Absolutely. What does it mean? What does it mean to you? Because, you know, some people, when we look at the social model, how it encompasses everything, you know, a lot of folks the goal is to really embrace your disability. And some folks, they, after years of having it and they're wanting to be sexual, they can finally get to a place where maybe they can do that, you know, and everyone's on their own journey with it. So those are the first things that we really talk about with sexuality and disability. And what does that mean to them? And what does a relationship look like to them? You know? And so having to uncover that. And when you're a gender minority, that's a whole other layer.
Yeah. Yes, that's a fascinating point. I mean, I do talk to a lot of other cis women who are dealing with the concept of what is sexuality to someone who's grown up where, especially those of us who grew up in the 90s, where all the rap was incredibly degrading and the ads were always selling a body. So it's like, well, if you want to dress sexy, is that something that was just sold to you as what's sexy, or do you actually find that sexy? And I'm sure that there's a lot of people who, you know, I'm just talking from personal experience, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to that in their own sphere. But that is a question of like, what did we get told is sexy and hot, and what is actually something we find sexy in and of ourselves?
Yes, and it's so critical. And by doing that, that's when you find out how much of a sexual being you are, and who are you as a sexual being.
I mean, I'm telling you, the Doctor Who sweatshirt is hot. I mean,
The Doctor Who?
my Doctor Who sweatshirt is totally sexy.
Oh.
Hot.
Oh boy. Yeah, but that's how we start those conversations. That's how we do it. You know, we talk about what is it that you're really wanting to do and how do you explore with your body. You know, have you ever talked to Andrew Gurza?
I don't think so.
He's amazing. He is a queer disability activist, and you know, he talks a lot about being, and he suffers from cerebral palsy, and he talks a lot about being in your body and really identifying what is great to you as a sexual being. And so one of the things that really comes up in my sessions is, you know, and he talks about this too, is really talking about solo sex and masturbation and different ways that you can masturbate. And that's really been coming up in my work too, with people having to do social distancing right now, you know, getting creative again with their sexuality. We're so quick to go to porn. And so one of the things that has been coming up is, what about erotic literature? Reading again, you know, folks are finding that to be amazing. And when they're looking at how to be sexual in their bodies, that's one of the things that I've been recommending, erotic literature, looking at different things. And the idea of whatever happened to phone sex?
I guess I went to FaceTime, but I'm old.
Yeah, but you know, people are starting to get back into that again and finding that to be exciting. That was coming up too in a lot of my work lately and some of the research that I've been doing. And so, but when you are a gender minority, someone who's trans, non-binary, LGBTQ, and you're wanting to come out with a disability, you know, having to do a coming out process all over again. That can be challenging.
Yes. Just to go back to masturbation for a minute,
Hmm.
again, cis female perspective here is, it was never assumed that we would master. It was actually like an incredibly shameful idea that, at least in the spheres that I was in, and then, growing up in the 90s, was like, that was just unthinkable and disgusting. And so there was this huge level of shame around it. And to the point that I didn't know any woman in my groups that actually knew what anything looked like or what it was until we used tampons, where we got the
Yeah.
actual graph. I was like, I had no idea any of this was there. Like, and it's so interesting to, like, if you own a vagina, if you're an owner of one of these things, like, it's not something that's there. It's not something assumed that you're going to be touching it. So to get people past that idea of, and even understanding how to, like, it's not,
Hmm.
you had American Pie, which was like this whole movie that is this entire, like, almost
Exactly.
how-to manual for men. Like, it's just, the whole movie is about masturbation and like how this is just absolutely the thing that happens for owners of penises. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, but there's
Hmm.
nothing that, is outside of, I mean, even if you watch pornography, you're not going to generally see even female masturbation that would necessarily work.
Well,
It's
you're
a much
not,
more visual.
and you're
Yeah.
not, and that's why it's so important to talk about pleasure and what pleasure means to people, and how do they explore their pleasure, and what pleasure does. Right? It is a foundation of affirmations for people. I mean, people really enjoy doing that, and the goal is to really find out, well, what feels good to you as an individual other than everybody else, right?
Yeah.
If you are a woman, or if you are a trans person, or a non-binary person, or you're a person with disability, or you're a person that is trans and non-binary and you have a disability, that's not talked about. It's not discussed. Like what you were saying with men, yes, I mean, that's always coming up, right? But we don't really see
You didn't even
that.
stop at the pun. My God. Sorry. That was a good pun right there. Just had to throw that in. I'm
you
essentially
know
12.
yeah, but that's what happens. That's what gets
Yeah.
talked about. It's not talked about if you are a trans woman, with a disability, and you're wanting to be sexual. That doesn't come up, and I'm so glad that I can hold a space and have people that can come in who are trans and who can talk about what sex means to them, and what sexuality is, and someone who is transitioning into finally another body and having gender euphoria, which of course is amazing when people can feel that about themselves.
Can you give
um,
a quick definition for gender euphoria?
Gender dysphoria is basically,
Oh,
it's the
dysphoria.
opposite.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you
Oh,
said
gender, well,
euphoria, and I was
no,
like, wait a minute. I've
gender,
never heard
no,
that one before.
well, gender euphoria, it's the opposite of gender
Okay.
dysphoria. So it's being more comfortable in your body and owning your body and feeling great in your body. And sometimes it takes a while to get there and to really feel that. I have a big problem with gender dysphoria. I feel like it labels people, and it gives people this idea that you are disabled and you can't be, and it puts, I think it does a lot of pathology with it, right? Where yes, there can be this dysphoria about not being in the body that you want to be in, but when you label that, it's like a diagnosis. And I think we're trying to get away from that. That's gender dysphoria.
About gender dysphoria and clicking headphones. So I just have to stop you there, because what really is hitting me in the solar plexus is your idea of, like, that feeling of belonging in your body and your body not being a mutiny. And I think anyone even without gender dysphoria has that feeling, if you are chronically ill or disabled, of living in something that is a mutiny.
Yes, it's a great point. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
how do we do that? Because I get accused all the time of calling my body an it. I always third person the body. So how do you get to a place where something that causes you such tremendous pain or discomfort, or disassociates from gender, or disassociates from what you want to be? How do you make terms with being in this avatar?
Well, I think that, you have to look at where you're at in your journey with chronic illness and disability. You know, when when people are first diagnosed with a chronic illness, the biggest thing is there's a crisis phase there, and there's a rejection of you not wanting to be into your body. That's one big thing that I see a lot when I have people that come into therapy. You know, the second phase that folks go through is the stabilization. They're wanting a diagnosis. Some people, it's different for each client that I see. You know, some folks, they want a diagnosis, some do not want a diagnosis. They want to go into a denial factor, and so they reject their body. That's usually one of the most common things that I see as a therapist that specializes in chronic illness. And then the third stage that I see folks go through is this integration phase, of wanting to integrate their old self into their new self.
Mm.
And that can be a challenge because they can't always, you can't do that, right? You're having to give into a new body. And that's really hard for folks. So by coming into the therapy process and talking about the grief that happens, there's a grief that comes with chronic illness, you know, and a lot of times that first stage is that denial factor. So when you move past that and you go into this integration phase where you are integrating your new body into your old body, or your old body into your new body, trying to combine both of those, that's when I see people wanting to be sexual again. It's almost like they have actually accepted where they are in their body, and now they're wanting to explore other avenues of things. And one of those that comes up is sex, but I usually don't see it until they really get into that integration phase. When there's this stabilization phase, you know, a lot of times sex is the last thing they want to talk about. They're not sexual. There's a lot of low sexual desire. And so working in that process with them to do that is where you start to see a change. And it's a journey. It takes a lot of time. You know, I have different people that come in with different phases. You know, they may come in where they have done the work, they've accepted their illness, they're starting to live with their new body, what they're needing to do, learning to listen to their body more, knowing when they need to take breaks, knowing when they need to set limitations. And that's where they want to explore other avenues. So in my work, that's how I've dealt with that as a therapist.
So what are some things that someone can do once, if they feel like they're at a place where they're starting to get past the crisis point and they're wanting to just start to move more into being in their bodies? Is there some exercises or some things that you can think of that could help?
Sure. Yeah. A lot of what I always recommend, this is a good classic one that John Kabat-Zinn used to do back in the day for chronic pain, is doing a body scan. Knowing in your body where your sensations are and paying attention to that, because it depends on the disability. You know, some people, they may not have sensations in places where they did, right? So it's being able to find that. You know, I have one client where he uses his thumb like if it were his penis.
Oh, okay. And how
Yeah.
does that work where you're starting to like redefine where your pleasure zones are?
So what we do is, again, it's going back to the blueprint. Like I asked him to find out what feels good on his body. And he was actually able, his partner, who was an able person, you know, it's an interabled relationship. And so she was able to touch him in places where he really felt great. And that was one place that really turned him on. And she massaged it like it were, if it were his penis. And so it's all about exploring. It's exploring your body. But again, it's being ready to do that. You know, again, everyone's on their own journey. But that's one exercise that I always recommend. It's going back to sensate focus, which is a type of exercise that we use in sex therapy, where it's kind of like mindfulness 2.0, and you're kind of touching the different points on your body that feel good to you, with no wanting the idea of really wanting to have sex. If sex is your goal, that's great. But if you're just trying to explore pleasure again for yourself and what feels good, there's a series of touching that you can do. And that's one thing that I've recommended.
That's incredible. Could you, I know you did the most amazing show notes, which will go up in full, but if you have some recommendations of, you talked about some literature, some erotic literature, some alternatives hopefully to Pornhub that do not exemplify violence and underage sex, that would be awesome. I have a huge issue with Pornhub, but yeah. I have no issues with porn. It would be great if you had some of the resources. I think that'd be incredible to put up at the top.
One of the things that I always recommend, there is a Sensate Focus book by there's two women that wrote a book on Sensate Focus. Linda Widener is one of her names, and then there's the other person who I can't think of at this time. But if you just Google that, like the Sensei Focus book,
Okay, I keep hearing Sense8 because my co-host is in love with that show. I'm assuming that's not what we're talking about.
Sense8, it's Sensate, Sense8 Focus.
Got it. I will have a link to that in the show notes if anyone's curious.
Yes, it's
And your book should be coming out soon.
Yeah, in 2021, my book will be coming out, and I will have different exercises in my book. There's going to be a whole chapter in there on sex, reclaiming sexuality, on looking at what's pleasurable to you through a series of touch, but also the thought process, because thoughts drive behavior. So looking at how to restructure thoughts to be more sexual, to address the anxious thinking and the depressive thinking that comes with chronic illness. So I'm going to be talking a lot about that. Another great book that I really like to recommend too for couples when you're wanting to become intimate again is The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work by John Gottman, Gottman. That is a wonderful book. It's got a series of exercises that you can do with your partner on enhancing what he calls your love maps with each other. Because in my work, I have found that most couples need to reclaim their emotional stability in their relationship after there has been a diagnosis of a chronic illness or there's a disability. And then once there's this foundation of emotional stability, then they go into looking at sexuality. And he does a good job of reconnecting that. Another great book that I love too is called Getting the Love You Want. And that is by Harville Hendrix, Harville, and Hendrix, Hendrix. Fabulous book on looking at an unconscious partnership on why people are together, and then looking at a conscious partnership. And he gives a series of exercise on how to build intimacy with partners. And I really enjoy his work too. He's the founder of Imago Relationship Therapy, which is a great therapy on enhancing intimacy with your partner and how to deal with conflict. So those are the books that I love to recommend. Another great book is The Ultimate Guide to Kink. And I'm not going to get her last name. I'm not sure what the spelling is, but Tristan Taramino. It's a great book.
So you talked about media in your show notes, and I wanted to explore that because I can definitely see your point. But I was really excited this year when a show called Sex Education came out on Netflix, and they have a disabled character who has a sex life. They have different body types, different. Like they go through all sorts of stuff with kink. I was wondering what your thoughts were, because I thought this is such a huge push forward in our ideas of casting, of media exposure.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it goes back to the idea of the misconceptions that people with chronic illness and disability aren't sexual. So anytime there's something that's coming out in the media and pushing the buttons, that's great. I think it's a great foundation. It's laying it out there that people are sexual and can be very sexual. And that's why I do the work that I do, to really help people become sexual or to explore sexuality. So anytime there's a new show, which it's, when have we had that, right?
I mean, Gillian Anderson has always been like, X-Files on, a hero of mine, but that show, I just I fell in love with that show of how they normalized everything, and how nothing was shameful except cruelty. The only thing that was shameful was cruelty.
Yes, well, I love that you bring that up, because that's really what we do in therapy is we normalize things, right? That it's okay that you're sexual. It's okay that you're having feelings of wanting to try different things, or that you have a fetish, if you have a kink, right? That's what sex positivity means. It's being open to sexuality as long as it's consensual and it's not harmful to someone, if there's no consent, right? But as long as it's consent, it's pleasurable, it's something that helps you. I mean, we're seeing a big shift now with sexuality where people are really using sex to help cope with certain things, to help cope with the chronic illness and disability that they have, and to be more in touch with their bodies. So it's very, very powerful what we're seeing now in the field.
I mean, I did hear a rumor that like orgasm is supposed to drop pain by 30%. I have no idea if that's true or not. I like to believe it, but
Yes, research has shown a lot of with that, that is a case that can happen, but also it helps your immune system too. You
there's a lot of pluses. If I'm hoping that that also works for self fulfillment and masturbation, but I have no idea.
Yes.
I think the number should probably be about the same for that as well.
It really helps for relaxation purposes when people are very stressed and they're anxious. A lot of times people, they don't really have the desire to want to have sex with someone, but they may have solo sex or masturbation because that provides them pleasure and comfort, and it can help you sleep, and it releases endorphins in your body. A lot of people, they talk about that in therapy, that after they have an orgasm, they get very sleepy, and it helps them relax and to go to bed at night. So there's a lot of reasons why, a lot of great benefits of masturbation.
And
Uh,
so many less side effects than sleeping pills. I mean,
it's true. Less side effects. Absolutely. It really does a lot for you. And when you have a partner, you can get very creative with it. I always, one of the things I always, you know, tell people is that, it's you get creative and you communicate with your partner on, what you're feeling. And when you can do that and you can get to a place that brings you pleasure, well, then it's another great way to cope.
and we all need the most coping we can get.
Absolutely. And people are looking for different ways to cope. And so, mindfulness, meditation, cognitive work, doing a self inventory of your emotions every morning when you wake up. Where are you feeling the most pain, right? I always recommend a body inventory. If you're feeling pain in an area, how are you going to pay attention to that day, right? What do you have to do? It's okay to say no. It's okay to set those boundaries. I always talk about pacing for pain. So if you feel good one day, do not clean your entire house.
We're going to
Don't.
disagree on this one. The house will never get cleaned if I don't do that.
Well, I mean, you have to do what you have to do, but I think it's important to be careful because if you push yourself too much, then sometimes you're down for the count for a few days, but everyone's body's different. You know what? That's what's great about working in this field is that everyone is going to process things differently. And, things are going to work better for others, and that's what I love about this work and being able to help people cope with pain, but also to become more sexual. And they're finding that the more sexual I become, it helps my self-esteem. It helps me cope with my illness and disability. It helps me build connections with other people. It helps me build a sense of community, which I think is very helpful. And so that's one thing that I do too, is I really encourage people to join different groups, to join, if you just, there's FetLife, which is really good for the kink community. There's several different podcasts out there and different literature and books. So it's always great stuff.
So you talked a lot about getting people to a point where they want to have sex, but there's a lot of people who don't want to have sex, or they're more into the asexual romantic. How
Mm-hmm.
can people who are not necessarily wanting sex but wanting connection, or maybe even not that, how can they participate in their own space? I don't have a full understanding of this at all. I'm assuming you have much clearer ideas of
Well,
this.
with
But
asexuality, it's the idea of not being sexually attracted to people, right? So most of the time when someone is asexual, or ace, they call it, they're not going to be. It's very rare that I have an asexual person in therapy, but I've had maybe one or two clients that have been. And so for them, they really want to build a connection with other folks who are asexual. That's why organization and clubs really help, to be able to talk about that in a space. Or I've had folks that are also demisexual, where they have to be emotionally secure with someone or have an emotional connection before they become sexually attracted to someone. And demisexuality falls on the spectrum of asexuality. What's interesting is that people that are asexual, they do masturbate. And they may not masturbate to porn. They may not masturbate because they're turned on. They may masturbate because it gives them a sense of relaxation.
Mm.
So just because you masturbate and you're asexual, it does not mean you're going to want to go out and have sex. So it's very different for everyone, and how they do that. But anytime I have a client that falls into that spectrum, or even if they're non-binary, I always recommend doing getting involved in some type of group to where they can have support. Because I always ask my clients, who's your support outside of therapy?
And how do people who might feel very isolated or not have family or a partner, or how do they find support?
Well, they find support through psychotherapy. I mean, I would really recommend therapy more than anything. If you are needing support, but you're not getting that because you're far from your family, you're not close to your family, you don't have a partner, seeking a therapist can be extremely helpful. A sex therapist is great, to build that connection. And the sex therapist will be able to refer you to some resources in your city or your state that you're in. You can also go to the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists website, which is www.asect, which is AASECT.org, and you can receive various resources there as well that can be very, very helpful.
Now, we have a listening audience that spans like the globe, and there's not sex therapists in every country. Is this a good resource for people who are in other areas that might not be as open? Or
Yes, because there's a resource tab on the website where they offer literature. So
that'll be at the top of the show notes, by the way, everyone. So if you head over to show notes and you didn't catch that website, it'll be at the very top.
Mm-hmm. ASECT is great because, yes, it's established here in the States, but, they offer like different various research literature for folks in terms of reclaiming sexuality, looking at sexual desire and all those different things. Absolutely.
So for also for people who can't afford you or a therapist, or there's I'm sure you're aware there's a huge shortage of therapists in the United States. So in the middle of the country, you have states with maybe one or two therapists. Is this a place where someone could go to find an online therapist? Or if someone doesn't have the funds for a therapist, is there a good resource?
One thing that I would really recommend that you do is go to psychologytoday.com, and then you can put in the zip code where you live and the different therapists will come up. That's a good resource because Psychology Today, they really do reach out to the public. So anywhere where you live, you can find that. Or if you simply put in therapists in your area, you can see what comes up. But we're in an age where telehealth is becoming such a big thing. And so a lot of therapists are offering their services via telehealth, which is great. And you can also do that too if you're living in an area where you can't find a therapist.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm always just concerned about the cost for everyone as well, because we almost went like under trying to pay for therapy in the household. Like it's such an important thing to be able to have, but unfortunately not as affordable.
It's not. Yeah, it's very difficult because there are a lot of therapists out there that don't take health insurance. There are some that do, but a lot of them will have sliding fee scales, and some do pro bono work. I mean, I am all about a believer of helping people, and I love, I will definitely do slide and scale fees with clients if I need to. We'll come up with a payment plan, whatever can fit their needs, because therapy, it's such a great place because you're talking to someone, they're not a friend, they're not a family member, but they're trained in this area, but they can be a great sense of support to give to you when it's really needed at a time where you're struggling with different things.
That is precisely why we keep this podcast completely free. All of it. There's nothing behind a paywall, is because this is what we can do, is to get information out there. So I was going through your show notes, and one of the things I want to talk about was self-esteem. and sexuality, especially, you know, those of us who are on new medications, which can cause dietary issues, stomach, gastro issues, huge swings of weight on either side. How does this work in?
Well, a lot of times, you know, a lot of people have a lot of sexual side effects due to medications, right? And also to body image sometimes. So I am a therapist that is all about body acceptance and accepting yourself. I practice health at every size. So what I really try to do is work on the self-esteem and why the self-esteem is low and how do we get it back up. And I think the way that we do that is we identify the strengths that you do have, and then we run with those strengths. You know, a lot of times when people come into therapy, there are different therapists out there. So sometimes there are psychotherapists and sex therapists that only focus on the problem, but I don't like to do that so much. I think it's critical to look at what are your strengths? What makes you you? How do you identify with yourself? What makes you special in the world? What gives you pleasure? What causes happiness if you have that? That's critical when it comes to building self-esteem. And how do we get there? You know, because there are medications that can cause, I mean, you know, medications, they're great, but they're not great. You know, they can help ease depression. They can help with anxiety. Of course, if you've got an illness, there's medications. But there's also so much more. And that's why psychotherapy is becoming the cutting edge treatment for chronic pain, because doctors, they can only do so much. But in therapy, we can talk about your feelings and your emotions and how does that relate to your sexuality and how does that relate to your pain and the pleasure that you want to have. You know, one thing that's really important is that I find that just holding the space for someone to talk will really help. It goes very, very far. And in a doctor's office, you don't get that all the time. You get 15 minutes, you're in, you're out. But in psychotherapy, you're there for 45 minutes to an hour.
That's a very important distinction. You actually have someone who's not just reading your chart. Didn't read your chart.
Yeah, I have no files in my hands. I have no paper in my hands. I'm not writing in therapy. I'm listening. I'm talking. I'm helping you make decisions. I help a lot of clients with chronic illness. One of the things that we do that they really love is we jot down thick questions that they want to ask their doctor.
No, seriously, like if I can give anyone one tip, if you have a cell phone, create a file in either your notes or your Google Keep that is just a running list of questions for your doctor. Like it's almost, I get white coat freeze. I see a white coat, I just start freezing. Like I can't think. So having that is so helpful.
Yeah. A lot of people do. A lot of people get white coat freeze. They get very anxious. They get nervous. So when they get anxious, what happens when you get anxious? You get fight or flight. You either want to run out of the room or you want to fight it. But if you fight it, you don't know what you're going to say. So I help clients really understand their emotions as it relates to their illness and the things that they want to ask their doctors. But I have found that when people can cope with their depression and their anxiety and their sexual concerns, they're able to manage their illness a lot better and their pain better. I really do believe that there is a thing where when you're able to decrease symptoms of depression, anxiety, stress, you can manage the pain better. But when you're more anxious and you're more depressed and you're very stressed, what does that do? That can increase pain levels and it creates low sexual desire. And so when you're able to focus on that and decrease those levels, then we find that people become more sexual too, which is really interesting during the time. I know we weren't going to talk about COVID-19, but it's just so fascinating how a lot of my clients with illness, they're used to being in isolation, right? But they're calling me and they're like, you know, Dr. Phillips, I'm really horny.
I think you're the only like business someone could call and say that, and it was not inappropriate.
Isn't that great? Isn't that awesome? And they're like, I really want to have sex. And I know I'm doing this whole social distancing thing, which I really call it more physical distancing because we're being sociable right now. But I mean, I think that with the
I don't think I've ever been so social with my FaceTime wine dates with my friends. We're having FaceTime tea dates. Like I am like more social now than I ever have been.
I have my first virtual birthday party tomorrow night.
Oh, I forgot we were close on birthdays. Yay, happy almost birthday.
Oh, not mine, I'm going to one.
Oh, well, happy birthday to them.
Happy birthday to So I'm really excited. I've never done a virtual party before.
This is a crazy, wonderful time for those of us who've been in isolation who are not necessarily introverted and kind of bodily forced into introversion with all of our friends home and now discovering how great FaceTime and Zoom is.
It's really hard for me. I have to admit, I'm having a difficult time because.
So how are you dealing with it? How are you processing the sudden?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking. Well, I'm practicing mindfulness. I am spending a lot of quality time with my husband. We're watching movies. I'm catching up on shows that I used to love. Oh, it's so funny. I have to share this story because this will make people.
I'm sorry, but please tell me you're watching the Tiger documentary.
I'm watching that. I'll have to.
Oh my God. I can't even process this show. It's on Netflix. It's Joe Exotic. Just please watch all of my friends who are therapists are on Facebook just I don't even know.
I'm always looking for new things to watch. I'll have to check that out. But no, it's really funny. So I told my husband the other day, I said, I want to go to a bookstore and I want to get a novel. I don't want to get a nonfiction book. I don't want to read about sex. I don't want to read about chronic illness. I don't want to read about psychology. I want a novel that I can get lost in during this time. And of course, I go to the bookstore and I'm looking around. I'm looking at all these novels and nothing is piquing my interest. I'm like, nope, don't want to read that. That's depressing. That's too sad. That's too whatever, cheesy. And of course, I walk out of there with a sex book. I ended up getting a sex therapy book. But it's just funny because I was trying to get out of my comfort zone and do something different. But hey, I'm watching different TV shows and, relaxing, taking walks. We have a lot of cases here in DC. I know California is very crazy right now with numbers too, but getting out and getting some fresh air, if you can get out and walk around and just try to find the things that are positive right now, that's what's critical during this time. But anytime you're battling chronic pain and chronic illness, just trying to find those things that bring you some joy. It's so critical and so important.
Well, if you want a book, I just bought this book for someone from my local bookstore who delivered it. The 10,000 Doors of January is my favorite book from here on out. I was a literature major. I'm a bookworm. This is the best book I've ever read. So if you need a good escape from the world book that is not a sex education book, this is my favorite literature book ever.
Oh, I'm going to have to get it.
Please do. I'm in love with this book.
I will get it. You're recommending it. Hey, I'll definitely check it out.
It was my favorite escape. I had dislocated my wrist really violently at 10 o'clock at night, and I have my iPhone, which I can just hold with one hand, and I read about 200 pages in until 4 a.m. I forgot about my wrist. So if it can make you forget about a dislocated wrist, I'm definitely selling this book. This is my favorite. She does not pay me. I'm in love with this book. I did want to cover one more thing before we go. And you talked about the different stages of things, and that there's stages where you just can't. You're in a survival mode. Mm-hmm. How can you stay connected as a couple, a throuple, a poly, a self? How can you stay not necessarily sexual, but still appreciating being in a body? How can you, as a partner, as a friend, not necessarily romantic or sexual, but how can you keep either intimacy with yourself or with others?
Sure. No, that's a great question. One of the things that I recommend if I'm working with couples, I always recommend check-ins, that you check in with each other. You put it on a calendar. It's not about sex. It's not about intimacy, but just having a time where you check in because, no matter what type of world you're living in, what you're doing, we're always on autopilot mode. We're on autopilot mode with ourselves. We're on autopilot mode if we've got children, if we have jobs, if we have, hey, spoonies have tons of appointments to go to. You know what I mean? So having check-ins, putting it on the calendar, hey, at 8 o'clock on Friday, this is my check-in with my throuple, with my partner, with my partners, just having a conversation, checking in with each other. It doesn't have to be this big positive conversation. It's just, hey, what's going on? Is there something that you need from me right now in terms of support, right? When I work with single people, chat rooms, chat lines, friends that you can call, You know, just having some type of support goes really far that way. And because I do work with a lot of people who are not sexual. They don't want sex. Sex is the last thing on their minds, right? So they want to have, but they want to have a connection. And so we talk about that and being able to check in. That's critical.
It seems like right now, like just talking to some friends who are separated from their spouses, either because their spouses are in the healthcare industry or they got separated by borders right now. It seems like a lot of that can be done via FaceTime or, Zoom is really what's going to keep us all going, and Skype.
Zoom taking over the world right now. There's Skype. Make sure your volume is up on that because I can't figure mine out.
We were having fun for about 15 minutes before this started.
We're having fun, but we figured it out.
We did.
We got this Zoom. But yeah, technology these days, right? FaceTiming, getting on there with people. Like what we were talking about earlier, one of the things that I love, recommend for people to do is to definitely check out sometimes too. You want to be connected, but you also to be there for yourself. Don't always sit with your feelings. Reading a good book, a novel, getting lost in it. It's a great way to cope with pain, to cope with depression. Those things go far too, but check-ins are critical. I always recommend those.
Yeah, we have State of the Union at our house we have a State of the Union with marriage every 6 months or so, just to make sure our values are still on point. What are we still thinking? Yeah, it is very much a State of the Union. It's not a date night. We go through what we're concerned about, what we have issues possibly with each other or with our communication, or do we still have the same idea of what we want to do in the next 5 to 10 years, next 20 years? Are those still lining up? I find it really helpful to have a State of the Union from both sides.
I love that. I like calling it that. That's a great.
We're geeks here.
That's amazing. But no, I think that's important, right? The check-ins, whatever you want that check-in to be, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they're so critical to do with your partner, to do with your friends, because, when you hold your emotions in and you're not processing, that's what we call flooding. It builds and it builds and it builds, and then it's like the floodgates open. But if you're doing check-ins or you're having a conversation and you're getting support, that goes so far. And so I always recommend those. Absolutely.
Do you have anything else that you wanted to cover with us? Very wide-ranging topic.
I know, we really got into a lot of things. We could have a show on each of these, but I think the one thing
anytime
is to check in with your body. Listen to your body. The body really is a foundation that helps the mind. I think do that check-in every day, where you're at. If you are having this bucket attitude, stay in bed if you have to. Do what you have to do. You don't have to force yourself up. You don't have to. That's where acceptance comes in. Accept your feelings and where you're at in the moment. Don't feel like you've got to challenge everything. That's one thing that I really do stress, because I have a lot of people that come in with pain and illness and they say, I have guilt or shame because I should be doing this. I should be getting up. I need to clean my house. I have to do this. Well, guess what? Your body's now allowing it today. So do what you have to do to get through the day.
I absolutely hear that, but I will say I hope all of you have the resources to be able to do that, because I know some of you who are listening, including myself, do not have the resources to be able to listen to our bodies and stay in bed when we have to. So it's wonderful you have those resources. Take advantage of that and be grateful you have those resources. That's all.
If you have resources for that, that's great. If you don't, people can always reach out to me. So if you ever want to follow me on Instagram, I check my messages there. It's at Dr. Lee Phillips.
He's much better checking the messages than I am. He is so much better at that. Please don't get mad at me. There are messages in there from 2017.
Monica doesn't check my messages.
I'm really off. I am barely hanging on by fingernails. Eva is trying so hard to clean up after me with not being able to.
You do a great job though. You do what you can though.
But please follow Dr. Phillips. That's and also at the top of the show notes will be all the links to follow Dr. Phillips.
You can follow me, reach out to me, ask me a question. I'm here for support. I'm here to help guide you. If you need a resource, let me know what you're looking for, and I will definitely try to point you in the right direction.
That is an amazing and kind resource. Thank you for being on the show again. I really love having you on. It's always a treat.
Thank you for having me. I always love being on here with you.
Well, everyone, just remember the only shame is cruelty. So keep that in mind as you go through your day. This is unprecedented times. So the be kind, be gentle, and be a badass in whatever way that looks like is never been more important. So take care of each other, take care of yourselves. This has been kind of crazy, and stay as sane as you can and get the 10,000 Doors of January. Trust me, it's like ultimate escape in the world. It's a really good one. Or if you haven't watched Sex Education, please go watch that. That was fantastic. Have a great week, everyone. We are self-funded, so if you want to be a Patreon, never know how to pronounce that. We do have an account. We would be very grateful if you can. If that works for you, that's wonderful. If that doesn't, but you still want to support the show, sending these episodes out to your friends, family, and social media groups is really, really an act of kindness. So thanks, everyone. Have a good week as possible, and take care.